Give it another couple minutes, and then we'll get rocking and rolling here. All right, well, let's get started. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Mike Gisnaldo. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer here at Revealed, and I'd like to extend a warm welcome and appreciation to all of our attendees, along with our hosts. I'd like to start off, just go over a little bit of the format that we'll follow today. We've got 5 exciting topics around AI and cybersecurity that we're going to discuss today in a fireside chat format. We'll spend about 3 to 5 minutes in this section in introductions to our panel, and then we'll spend probably about 10, 15 minutes for each topic. I want to allow the conversation to breathe a bit and have some really good conversation around this with our hosts. And then we'll have about 10, 15 minutes towards the end for questions. Feel free at any point in time to pop your questions into the chat panel. It's in the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to all those questions towards the end. So without further ado, let me start with some introduction. So our first host has consistently demonstrated his ability to drive innovation, manage risk, and protect sensitive information, leveraging his extensive experience in deep understanding of AI and the cybersecurity landscape. He's currently serving as the Chief Trust Officer at Hidden Layer, previously held similar roles with organizations such as Revealed, Cymatics, Cylance, and Intel. He's collaborated with the White House Office of Management and Budget on the federal government's procurement of AI, and also been part of public policy discussions in DC around AI and cybersecurity. Ladies and gentlemen, Malcolm Harkins. Next up, we've got our second host is a seasoned cybersecurity leader with over 25 years of experience and passion for cybersecurity. He brings with him a blend of technical expertise and leadership skills and a focus on building innovative solutions that protect data and privacy in the digital age. Currently serves as the Chief Product Officer at Revealed, and previously held executive leadership positions at industry giants like McAfee, MasterCard, and Intel. He launched the Apple Card for MasterCard, stole billions of dollars from cyber criminals. Ladies and gentlemen, Simon Hunt.
Thanks, Mike.
Welcome, gentlemen. Let's jump right in. So exciting topics today. One thing I want to point out is just how fun. Can you go back to that, Sabrina? I think it talks a little bit about AI, and it actually talks about security within AI. So one of the things I wanted to do is put something fun and exciting out to get us started. I went into ChatGPT. I put both your profiles into LinkedIn, and I put your LinkedIn profiles in, and surprisingly enough, ChatGPT couldn't access that because it said it doesn't have access to it. So it was just interesting going through the setup for this to actually see security and AI working well together. Because it blocked it because it said it didn't have like admin rights or privileges to view that information. So it was just interesting to see a little practical application. But this is what your AI images look like, gentlemen.
Hey,
so,
at least it knows redheads don't go gray.
Yeah,
and it got my gray in there pretty good.
It's funny. I did this for my picture, and it gave me a full head of hair, so I left it off. But yeah, really, really excited. But anyways, we can go to the next slide. So first and foremost, I think our number one topic today is exploring AI's role in cybersecurity. So what we want to talk about here, it's such a big, broad topic, so we want to hone it down a little bit. I think we want to discuss a little bit, and maybe Simon, you can chime in here, specifically just about AI technologies and their impact to our organizations as a whole and just society as a whole. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, we often forget AI has been around forever. I mean, what we call AI, we called, reinforced learning. We called it expert systems 20 plus years ago. This idea of using machine intelligence, let's call it, or algorithms to find insights, it's been around forever. So there's all kind of classes of AI. And, when I was with McAfee 15 years ago, we were using behavioral-based intelligence to find malware. That's AI. That's what CrowdStrike and Falcon uses today, and Cylance use in Malcolm's world. This year, we talk a lot about Gen AI, generative AI, the idea of language-based AI. which is extended beyond language to voice, to imagery, to video. But now we're very concerned about that. But let's not forget that it's been helping us for the last 20 plus years. These models, these self-learning models, reinforced learning, models created with GPUs, they're an essential part of every cybersecurity tool already. What's changing, I think, is our ability to understand how to produce language and I'm going to say intelligence, but seeming intelligence from data using AI rather than people. That's becoming a very interesting thing to make things more accessible to everybody.
It is interesting how we've been using essentially AI for so long. You mentioned that, like behavioral analysis and all that. It's right just till recently it transformed into being called AI. But it's really exciting to see just the way and the adoption that it's happened. But with that, it's transformed quite a bit within organizations. Malcolm, maybe you can talk a little bit about or share some insights around the integration of AI and cybersecurity frameworks, because it can actually influence those frameworks, but then how do you build in a framework around securing AI? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, again, I'll tie off of what Simon said and then drive into that. So I think, again, there's a couple different ways to look at artificial intelligence. As Simon said, it's been around for a long time, and then we've had generative AI. So you have what I'll say the traditional AI, which is the predictive AI, and then we have the generative AI that has come out the past couple of years en masse, and everybody is using it and has the ability to interact with the ChatGPT and things like that. So there's AI used in the context of adding value to a business process or an organization, or to improve cybersecurity, as like Silence is done and CrowdStrike is done, Abnormal is done, a bunch of folks have been doing for a long time. So there's that AI used to increase productivity and capabilities. Then there's the fact that AI itself is a technology and a technology stack that's by and large unprotected. So there's the need to properly secure AI and all that goes into it, not just the infrastructure that it sits on, but the models themselves that are unprotected from a variety of things. And then there's the fact that the attackers are using AI because it adds value to their ability to create attacks, both in the traditional sense, how do I speed up using kind of the traditional artificial intelligence predictive AI to bypass and write things differently so that you can gain a foothold and maneuver through an organization. And then there's the generative AI attacks like the deep fakes and using those things to enhance the effectiveness of phishing and other aspects that might be for fraud or things like that. So there's all those categories of it. Then you start looking at okay, now let's specific to cybersecurity. Again, we've been using it for a while. You go back to Silence. Silence was one of the first companies out using traditional artificial intelligence, machine learning to predict malicious code before it executed in order to, in essence, mitigate the attack vectors that we're all seeing across endpoints and stuff like that. But we've also now started seeing the use of generative AI and security capabilities. How in my security event information management, how in my security orchestration automation, in my report writing, and all that analytics, how do I use generative AI in the security sense to make my SOC more efficient, my risk analysis more efficient, maybe my training and awareness and getting my end user to understand things earlier. So there's that again, that conversational aspect to it, and the efficiency that you can get leveraging generative AI as well for across the stack of things that we're seeing. So again, I think in that area, again, we've been using it for a while, but I think there's tremendous opportunities to further expand the value. It's Revealed has been doing this with its Epiphany intelligence platform and using machine learning to automatically generate attack paths and prioritize the vulnerabilities that you might have across your entire thing, from a random endpoint to an oh shit moment, to really give you those exploitable pivot points that you need to manage and mitigate to really manage corporate exposure, as well as then kind of triage and help you focus where you have to do you know, that kind of attack surface management and vulnerability management to the things that matter most that you need to deal with now. So like I said, there's tremendous things that have been done, a lot of amazing things that we've got right today, and a bunch of things I'm excited about going forward.
Yeah, you know, it's exciting to hear just the progression of AI in the industry. And I think you're right, making tools faster and more accurate is super important. When you start doing things at speed of compute power in general, it can make extremely fast decisions and more accurate decisions. I was listening to a podcast with Elon Musk the other day, you know, depending on how you feel about him, but he was mentioning the fact that like the second that it takes you to hit a keystroke, a computer can process 10,000 like 10,000 questions in that time. So that's the power of AI. It's delivering that compute speed. So being able to take what a human would typically do today, and even that 1 second that it takes you to do something, it can make 10,000 decisions in that amount of time. Really is going to make things faster and more accurate. Simon, I'm curious from your perspective. We talk about using tools. How have you used tools in your world? Like you did some really exciting stuff at MasterCard and some other companies, but tell me ways you've leveraged AI in your world.
Well, it starts with writing really great love letters to my wife, really great bedtime stories for my grandchild. Like if you want like a 2-page story on unicorns and puppets, like ChatGPT is amazing. But seriously, you forget that like at MasterCard you mentioned, if you've ever got that little text message on your phone saying, "Are you trying to buy something?" That's entirely powered by AI. All the credit card networks transact every transaction through global scale AI with the sole purpose of asking the question or answering the question, does this look like Simon? And you know that encompasses is the person holding the phone in the same hand that Simon usually holds the phone in? Is he typing with the same speed that Simon usually types with? Is he buying stuff in a time period in a location that is usually Simon? The AI has no concept of who you are, but it knows if you're the same person as normal. So AI is like ubiquitous in the payment industry and in the cybersecurity industry, as Malcolm mentioned. Every time that we needed to translate experience to automation, every time that we had a really smart person look at a piece of malware and say, yeah, that's malware because of this, this, and this, became an opportunity to train an AI model to say, well, you know, we know this is bad and this is bad and this is bad. Work out why and create an algorithm that's, if I can give you a new thing, you can say, well, that really looks like bad, or that actually really looks like good. Exchange human experience for an automation, because sometimes it's really hard to describe why something's bad in the cybersecurity world. But if you have enough of it, you could train an AI model to identify it. We always looked at in the days of beginning of AI, it was blueberry muffins. If you've ever looked at blueberry muffins versus chihuahuas, it's a fascinating story of image recognition. And the cybersecurity industry went through the same thing. Once we could categorize things as bad through human experience, we could train models to do it for us. And that inspiration became Cylance, became CrowdStrike. It removed the human analysis out of the equation. So it's everywhere. What's happening now is, we've got detection response sorted with AI using real hard AI models, real difficult math, real understandable, explainable AI. We know how the models work. Now the pivot is, how do we make this information more accessible to people? Like, how do we make somebody understand why something's bad without giving them a bunch of data and index and points and saying, look at this code? How do we translate that into something where someone who understands business but doesn't understand code or reverse engineering can make a decision? That's the interesting kind of tipping point we're on now, of translating difficult information that's usually only consumable by experts into people who are still experts, but experts in business, not experts in technology.
Malcolm, maybe you could chime in a little bit on, like Simon, I think that was an interesting, in summary from what you just said, AI is everywhere and used every day, from protecting organization to bedtime stories and love letters. Malcolm, I'd be curious from your perspective. Tell me a little bit about your use of AI in your world.
Yeah, so I think there's a number of things. You date back in time in my Intel days, again, public information, there was an individual who stole a few $100 million of intellectual property from Intel around 2006, 2007. Well, we found it, but it wasn't what I'd say efficient or effective. And we started instrumenting, before the whole end user behavior analytics market came up, our own security business intelligence program, leveraging the nascent data science team to go create the data and analytics to spot insider activities based upon a variety of factors. Again, back in my Intel days, that data science team also reported to me up through when I was running enterprise applications. Intel was starting to use that data science and machine learning to optimize factories. It's still doing that. So all these different ways in which it's being used. You've got in the medical industry, they're using AI to look at images, X-rays, MRIs, to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of spotting cancer, tumors, or a cavity in your teeth. So there's all those things. Simon mentioned the payment industry, right? That's been around for a long time for fraud management, fraud mitigation, loan processing. Again, there are a wide variety of things, factory automations occurring. I had a dialogue not that long ago back at the RSA conference with the head of enterprise risk management for a large airline. The airline industry, similar to the cybersecurity industry, has a labor shortage. Their labor shortage, though, however, is in skilled technicians to do maintenance on planes. Well, guess what they were thinking about using AI for is to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the maintenance crew, and basically have lower skilled maintenance people be able to do a little bit more than they normal. So that way the higher skilled ones could focus on higher skilled items and basically, again, reduce that labor pool shortage. Now, all that stuff is fantastic, but the other challenge that I mentioned earlier is the fact that AI is not protected. I know this public information. Silence's machine learning capability was breached in 2019 in what was one of the first known inference attacks against artificial intelligence. All the things that we talked about, all the things that Simon mentioned about, those things are unprotected because indirectly, as an attacker, if I'm purchasing things and getting credit card stuff, or I'm throwing malware against an agent that's using machine learning, if I can do it in the right way, I, in essence, start building an understanding of the weights in the model. Once I build an understanding of the weights of the model, I can infer what the model is doing and how it's operating. Once I've done that, I've actually been able to, in essence, steal the model, recreate it, and then create a universal bypass, which is what happened to Silence in 2019, that rendered the machine learning capability, in essence, inert, unable to detect. Because once you understand the weights, all you do is play within those parameters.
You're talking about leveraging bias, aren't you?
Exactly. So that's the other thing that we have to worry about, is how to actually manage and mitigate not only the traditional, predictive AI stuff, but all the generative AI items, because our existing tech stack, doesn't matter if it's your network security stack, your web application firewall, your existing firewall, your advanced network detection, your SIEM, your SOAR, the database security encryption, all that stuff is irrelevant. Why? Because they weren't built for the file types. They weren't built for the model types. They don't inspect them. They don't protect them. And either directly or indirectly, a user, whether they be an internal user or an external user, is interacting with AI, which means it's wide open to attack.
That's right. It's funny hearing you mention the medical industry about AI. I have a dog. Everybody knows if you have animals, you take them to the vet, they need an X-ray. An X-ray is going to be about $800 to $1,000, sometimes more. And the vet I go to just adopted a technology that is substantially less per scan. It's probably about $200, $250, and it leverages AI to be able to tell if the dog actually needs an X-ray. So instead of spending all that money on the X-ray, you can do a preemptive scan, and it leverages AI to give you that output on whether you need one. So it is all around us. It's everywhere. I think
and if you're the doctor, you charge $200 for that. And then if it says, yes, you need the scan, then you still get the $800.
That's right.
They just increase the revenue.
That's right. That's right. It definitely has the double dip effect. But I think in general, it's a good thing to have. And as someone who's had to take my dog to get many X-rays, it's exciting to have that, just to show the advancement in it. So let's talk about a little bit about advancements and the future challenges. I think it's another area where I think a lot of people are focused on right now. So let's talk about emerging threats. And you touched on this, Malcolm, when you were talking about like leveraging AI against AI and how do you protect against that. But what are you seeing in your world? I mean, you do a lot of topics on this. What are some of the emerging threats in the AI area that you see?
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of things. So from let's just look at a typical organization. Hidden Layer had done a threat report earlier this year, and we found on average that 98% of companies say that they're using artificial intelligence some way to create and is creating business critical value. So it's creating material benefit for organizations. On average, we found that there's almost 1,700 models in use in organizations. So you think of even all the things that you're getting and buying and stuff like that, plus the ones that you're using. So there's a lot of models out there. But the other startling thing is, over 70% had indicated they had some related security and privacy issue. We found other information that, over 20% of companies have said they've had some type of model attack. Heck, even if in the news, OpenAI had to block ByteDance, the parent company for TikTok, late last year because they were stealing ChatGPT 3.5 to build their own competitive model. So we're seeing all these type of threat vectors out there, and you've got everything from, data poisoning, model theft. You've got model evasion, the example of what I gave from a silence perspective or what could happen in the fraud. On the generative AI, you've got prompt injection and code injection that occur. And again, you could subvert various AI artifacts in the supply chain. We've found that, again, the public repositories that people are grabbing from, Hugging Face, and there's others out there, that upwards of a couple percent of the models that are in there, in the several 100,000 models that are in those public repositories, you've got thousands of them that are already have either embedded malicious code or malicious callouts. So those models are compromised before you even get them in order to conduct other attacks. They might operationally and functionally work for a foundation model for what it was intended, but it's also creating other risk conditions for you as an organization or your customers, depending upon how you're using it. And so again, there's a wide variety of issues that we've got to navigate. And then the question becomes, in the sense of how we've thought about security historically, a vulnerability scan, antivirus, EDR. What are you doing for model scanning? How are you validating the models don't have malicious code? How are you validating they don't have malicious callouts and potentially already poisoned data? Prior to production and while it's in production, take the concept of EDR. What are you doing for AIDR? How are you logging and monitoring the interactions of the models? How are you spotting all these attacks that are going against the models in order to disrupt them and manage and mitigate the risk? Those concepts that we have in terms of the traditional security industry of logging and monitoring interactions with devices and operating systems, scanning for viruses, scanning for vulnerabilities, and then the runtime real-time protection, we have to take those same concepts and apply them to the AI models themselves in order to manage and mitigate the risk that we have.
It's so interesting to hear you mention those numbers. 98% of companies leveraging AI to create business income, 1,700 AI models in an organization, 20% AI have seen an AI model attack. It's a whole new threat vector. And I think where organizations today, I mean, let's call it what it is a huge gap in cybersecurity in general, and people to actually help these organizations protect themselves. And that's based upon what today looks like. AI is a whole nother element of this. You talked about EDR, blew my head off when you said AI EDR. Like, I haven't even heard that term yet, but it's something that's important, right? Like, forget it just using EDR. How do you leverage AI to have a better EDR strategy and better EDR outcome? So
no, you're totally right. And even if you look at where I came from, Intel and even some of the other semiconductor companies, there, and the endpoint vendors, not the security endpoint vendors, but the Dells and the Lenovo's of the world. There's this whole thing that has started also coming about called the AI PC. AI is compute intensive and it's expensive, right? That's why NVIDIA's market cap has gone through the roof. And there's a cost of compute and economics that's starting to move the need from just a pure compute cost efficiency of doing model processing on your endpoints. And so this whole concept of the AI PC and having models run locally in addition to the cloud. So old client server computing, where do I put the load based upon the cost, the user experience, the latency, and all that other stuff? And sure, you're starting to also see the shift of the AI load from the cloud onto the client.
Wow, if I'm a security professional, I'm just feeling so much anxiety because I've been trying to keep up with what I have. Now there's this whole other element that's introduced, and I've got to learn. I've got to find people that have expertise in this field. I've got to buy technology for securing this. So Simon, I'd be curious from your perspective, like what are some of the strategies that organizations can do now to future-proof against AI threats?
I think it starts with understanding what you're using, having some discipline on that. So not allowing like a shadow AI, let's call it. Let's coin a new phrase, shadow AI. But to actually define like this is where and how we are using AI. And then deciding, okay, how important is it to my business? Like if somebody took the AI away, would my business fold? Would it be problematic? Usual risk-based thinking on the application of the AI itself. And of course, with AI especially, it's not only can somebody take it away, but what if they contaminate it? So it's giving biased or incorrect answers. Like what is the potential for that? Does the AI have a proprietary model? What if somebody stole it? Is there competitive advantage? So really looking at it like any other data system you would use, working out criticality, how, the reputation of the system, the consequences of an outage or taking away the consequences of contamination of the system. Starting there, just, I know it's new and it's scary, but it is another data processing system. And we are very familiar with how to do risk assessments with CRMs, with critical infrastructure systems. It's another system. It's interwoven in new and interesting ways, but there's a huge difference from a CISO like Malcolm's perspective. If the marketing team say, hey, we can't write any copy because our AI system's down, and the payment system saying we can't process any payments because the AI system's down. The risk and the reaction would be different for those two situations. So firstly, define what you're using, have some control, some discipline on where AI is being used, some understanding of where it's being used, qualify the risk of a broken or damaged or a compromised AI system for all those kind of use cases, and then react accordingly to shore yourself up.
It's almost like first step is being AI aware, like not being ignorant to what's actually happening in your organization and how AI is being used.
There's a worry that should I say no? Should I say no, I can't control it, I can't understand it, therefore we shouldn't use it? That's a risky thing to do, because if anything's proven in IT, when you say you can't use something to user population, they find other ways of using it. Just think about USB sticks. Everyone said no USB sticks. Everybody was using them anyway. So if you say no, you get the shadow problem. If you say yes with no barriers or no, it becomes a free-for-all and it becomes unmanageable. It is powerful. Let's talk about Gen AI in particular, the new Gen AI. It's powerful, it's useful, it accelerates, it elevates the ability of every worker to go way beyond their skill set. I mean, any worker can write much better prose, can answer questions, can handle statistics, can do basic algorithms much better than they could on their own with Gen AI. But there's the fear of, okay, what if it goes away one day? Does the whole business stall? Is there a data contamination, or is there a PII leakage into the AI models from what we're doing to use, what we're using with it? Is there a risk of bias, contamination, etc.? So the idea is to say yes with guardrails. And that's what I would encourage CISOs to start thinking is, where is it allowed? Where is it definitely not allowed because the risk is too high? And where it's allowed and there's risk, how do you quantify and contain and manage that risk?
Malcolm, we talked with Simon, just talked a lot about how to be proactive with AI. What are some of the reactive approaches that you've seen or that you see being effective in today's world with AI?
Yeah, on the reactive side, I'll just, I think Simon hit it. I think in the early days, there's some organizations that universally blocked it. And for me, that was just a put your head in the sand, dumbass approach that, the CISO or the legal team or compliance team didn't know what they were doing. And frankly, that generates more enterprise risk. One, because people will go around it. So it's you don't know what's happening. So therefore it's unmanaged risk. The other thing is if you think of all the technology transformations we've done over the years, a mainframe to client server computing, the internet, mobility, e-commerce, all that other stuff, there's a wasteland of companies that are irrelevant or no longer exist because they didn't keep up with the technology transformations, and then they were gone. Look at Blockbuster, right? It no longer exists.
That's right.
Netflix went from a mail order DVD business into digital streaming and stuff like that, all because of technology transitions, right? So I think there's an existential risk if you don't keep up with the technology that also needs to be thought about as we're doing this stuff. So again, now from a reactive perspective, I'm a proactive, preventative person by nature, but you can't eliminate risk. So I'll give you a physical analogy, and this is a dialogue that I had back in DC on the public policy sense. A lot of the things post the executive order from Biden around AI and all the things we're seeing around safety, non-bias, trustworthiness, and all that stuff. They're all good. They're all necessary. They're all things that are upfront in the security development lifecycle stuff. But I'll also tell you your existing security development lifecycle and all those other controls don't work because they weren't built to work for these file types, model types, and stuff like that. So those things all need to get retooled. But let's just say that you do that retooling and you've built an AI capability that manages those type of things. The analogy that I gave when I was back in DC a few weeks ago, that's like having building codes for building a high rise. In San Francisco, Chicago, and Florida, you want something that will stand an earthquake, something that will withstand the snow load, and something that will withstand the wind shear, right? Now, that's all preventative, proactive hardening of a building. Now, what we've been doing, unfortunately, with some of the public policy space is focusing on that and not talking about the operational aspects of it. We kick that can down the road and say that we'll deal with that later. And I'm like, that's the equivalent of saying we're not going to spec in the smoke detector to the fire alarm, the fire suppression system, the evacuation route when we construct a building. We have to think about the reactive side of it. How do we, again, do the alerting, the monitoring, the logging, the AIDR? How do we detect and respond to these things? And then once we have that instrumentation in place, how do we then fold that instrumentation into our existing SIM and SOAR and business operations and incident response and investigations? Because that's also what needs to happen in terms of reaction. We've got to layer in the technology that allows us to detect and respond to things, and then we're going to have to retool and expand all those existing operational processes and investigative techniques we've been using for years. That is in its early stages, but it's something we need to move faster on.
Yeah, I think you hit it. It's funny just hearing you guys talk about this is a couple of things it reminds me of. First and foremost, I think when cloud first came out, dev teams were spinning up instances with little or no insight, and it caused this huge risk. And it wasn't until years later organizations started getting more control of that stuff, and now arguably they have better control of it. But you're seeing AI technologies come out for coding, and you mentioned earlier like AI inserted bad code. Like there's a whole world out there. It sounds like, if I was to predict, it sounds like eventually organizations will be adopting like a chief AI officer, like someone in the organization to focus just on AI. What do you guys think?
Some of that is occurring, but I'll tell you that because I've created a Security for AI Council back earlier this year, and we've been having dialogues with them. Again, there's a number of chiefs. I have a CIO, I have a CTO, I have a chief data officer, I have a chief AI officer, I have a chief privacy officer, I have a chief information security officer who's owning the product and service side versus the IT side. So there's this complexity of silos in organizations that is making it hard to manage the governance of the digital sprawl, let alone the AI aspect of it. Now, I think an organization can decide if they need a chief AI officer. They might. You could also argue, if I have a CIO and a CTO, why isn't one of them doing it? Or why isn't that role reporting to them as a part of their scope, managing information and technology? You know, to me, I look at it and I go, you have an existing structure,
There's a challenge there, though.
and then create the right people underneath it versus creating another peer that creates another silo, which adds more organizational complexity to not only understand how to get value out of the technology, but to also manage the risk. Because now the CISO needs to deal with 3 other people rather than just who's owning the product technology stack, who's owning the factory technology stack, and who's owning the enterprise IT stack.
Simon, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, I was going to add one of the challenges I see small companies, and to be honest, all companies suffering with at the moment is a lack of clarity on what decisions they're making based on AI. And take the payment industry, for example. There are strong regulations that say decisions must be explainable in the payment industry. If you apply for a loan and you're denied, the bank has to be able to say it was because of this reason. Now, the bank can use AI to make that decision, but only if the AI is explainable. Only if they can take your input and go back into the model and say it was because of this criteria, this criteria, this criteria. Now, many AI models aren't explainable. You don't know how it gets from the input to the output, and they can't be used in situations like that. But in the case, I mean, I joked earlier about love letters to my wife. She knows they're written by AI. I take particular pride in the prompting, but there's no misunderstanding who wrote it. My wife knows it comes from AI, which means if it says something terrible one day, I'm off the hook, yeah, because it was the AI, not me. But businesses need to make sure they understand, you know, are we making the decision based on an AI model? And if so, which model, where did it come from, etc. Because when you start forgetting and you get some information and you say, okay, I'm going to make a pivot in my business because of this information, because it came from somebody I trust, and you don't realize that person used an AI model that may be biased, may be flawed, etc. There's a different amount of weighting you associate with the accuracy of that data compared to, did it come from a person? Did it come from the AI, etc. Maybe, I'm not saying one is better than the other, but it is different. So once you lose track of where you're using AI, then remember you're starting to make decisions based on an algorithm which is still evolving. We're in year 2 of Gen AI and year 30 of AI and year 100 million of the human intelligence factor.
Yeah,
know where you're making decisions.
I would add, Simon, that your wife should still hold you accountable.
Maybe.
For the pure example, there was stuff in the news. There was a lawyer who submitted a brief that used generative AI, and guess what? It had a bunch of false case law in there.
Yep.
I think you can never remove the human accountability. If I'm the user of the AI, my job is to understand the parameters with which it works well and which it doesn't, and then be the final cross-check before it goes out. And in reality, a human created AI. A human decided the parameters around it. A human decided to ship it and release it to the public. So ultimately, there's still a person or an organization responsible for what the AI did. And as soon as we lose that context, we've lost governance around AI.
Yeah.
So you bring up governance, and it's a really good pivot point. Really, what ethical governance and considerations need to be made in the space. You've done a lot of talk on this, Malcolm, but really would love to. And we talked about this too when we had our prep call a week or so ago. But the balance between innovation and regulation, and I think you had said like we can get this right this time. But love to just get your perspective, speaking specifically about that balance between being innovative with AI and leveraging it for all the goodness that it has, but regulating against the bad that it can cause.
Yep. Well, I'll pick on one word first, balance. Balance is like a balance beam. And when you frame things in balancing, one goes down and one goes up, which means you're always sub-optimizing something. You're sub-optimizing innovation, or you're sub-optimizing security and privacy. My view is that is absolutely the wrong way to frame things. We need to look at these things like a calculus equation where we're optimizing each coefficient to maximize the value created and minimize the risk that we might have. If we start thinking about this in an optimization way, we then will maximize the benefits and minimize the risk versus this up or down thing, which is a balance beam. So one, frame your mind differently between balancing to one of optimization across all these things. Number two, you look at what's happening the past couple of years, again, since ChatGPT got released, the EU AI Act. Colorado basically cut and pasted and added a couple of things. California and New York are starting to do their own thing. So just in the United States, we're having the equivalent of privacy laws get proliferated state by state by state with different items on it. Then you've got on the EU AI Act. Again, so if I think of what's happened in the past even 15 months, it's the biggest, fastest legal and regulatory thing I've ever seen to try and control technology and shape its path ever in the decades I've been in the tech industry. Then you go, well, why is that? Malcolm's opinion is we did a shitty job, frankly, managing the risk dynamics and implications of technology historically and kicked the can down the road. Big tech did it. Users of technology did it. They under controlled for risk, didn't want to deal with these things. And so we created this perfect storm of information technology risk. AI gets unleashed. It's the biggest tech change we've ever seen, the biggest spending we've ever seen, bigger than the internet, bigger than cell phones, bigger than cloud. And government said, we can't allow this risk curve to continue. So therefore, we're going to start regulating it more. Now, the downside of that is the stifling of innovation that I think could occur, because you could argue it's too early. You could argue it's a little bit overblown. You could argue in some cases it's causing people to pause, which slows down the potential journey. So I think we've got a challenge ahead of us in terms of how do we navigate the complexity of the regulatory environment, recognizing, I think the intent of it, while good, in some cases is a little bit too much too soon, and it might be too prescriptive when we're still early in this journey. So for me, we've got to dial it right where the regulatory stuff needs to encourage innovation while managing the risk and drive a level of accountability for the creators and operators of the technology.
It's funny when you say, like you said, this is the biggest and fastest legal and regulatory situation you've seen. It's going to come with pain, right? Because people are like open now and they can use whatever they want. And anytime you start talking about regulating something, people get very hurt, very upset. They have to make it on this.
I am sure these regulations are being written using Gen AI, to be honest. They are. Malcolm, you mentioned a few, but Colorado just signed one. Yep. Which enforces anti-discrimination. So it's all about creating an algorithm which somehow disparages or discriminates based on some unknown factor. And it applies to lending, to housing, to government services, which all sounds good, like good things. But then they keep going on to spell checking, spreadsheets, antivirus. The breadth of what it covers is extreme. And it applies a whole bunch of rules to anyone doing business in Colorado, providing services to any Colorado citizen, et cetera, et cetera. But some of these regulations are brutal in terms of their overreach, let's say.
Yeah, well, again, I think we can all agree that having, an algorithm or something like that that discriminates is not a good thing. At the same time, I don't think you can, we don't want it. I think it can occur. The question just becomes, was it sloppiness in the part of the creation of the technology and management of it, or was it intentional? Again, you just look at any business. You want to price discriminate, charge the highest price for the umbrella at the store right before the storm to maximize your revenue if you're in retail. and then you discount it when you have excess inventory and you're in a drought. Well, that's price discrimination. Well, let's just say that that price discrimination that makes sense if you're a retailer to do that to maximize your revenue, then creates an adverse impact in a highly ethnic neighborhood that's low income. Okay, well, that becomes the problem, right? And so you have to also think about then the consequences of doing that price discrimination to maximize your revenue and say, am I having an adverse impact on a particular population? And that how is inappropriate and unethical. So you have to do both. The question is, how are you doing those things to manage that?
Yeah, it's definitely an interesting time, and it's interesting even hearing Simon like push back a little against the regulation, over regulation. Like that's the population here. You have people that know AI really well and are really, really smart on it and understand it in a way to be able to put good regulation around it. But those who don't understand it on that level are probably going to view it as, why are they trying to control what we're doing? So
the question I always ask is there already a regulation? And Malcolm brings up price gouging, a very real thing, that there is a vast amount of regulation to control already. Now, the question is the technique of doing price gouging driven by an AI model sufficiently different that it requires a new set of law? Or does it just fall into, no, you're charging based on socioeconomic factors? That's not allowed. The law already covers that. So I get worried when, as Malcolm says, we rush to create legislation that affects how things are done because of technology, because technology is so transitory. Like in 50 years' time, we won't be talking about the same kind of AI, but these laws will still be on our books. So that's where I get worried about regulations that are driven by a technology revolution, because laws should be forever.
And to add to that, Simon, I think in the EU and certainly if we continue, what I'd say the burden of it without shaping it properly in the United States, that will stifle the innovation, that'll stifle the progress. Now, let's think on a global scale. Well, what will that do to the US's ability to compete in the worldwide scale if China doesn't do that, or India doesn't do that, or Russia doesn't do that, right? So there's a bunch of countries that will not create that type of regime, and they may then get in front of the United States in terms of its technical prowess, which has been powering our economy and our ability to stay not only from a national security perspective ahead of many others, but from a global economy ahead of everybody.
Makes sense. I think we're gonna go to questions and answers here in a second. So if you guys have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. I just set a note in there as well. But I think I guess to narrow it down or to boil it down, really, regulation is good. The right regulation is even better, but getting there is not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. There's going to be push and pull, but it's needed. There's got to be some sort of structure in place to protect ourselves. But anytime you put regulation, the balance is hindering innovation, right? And that's, I think, the balance that we're trying to create here. So, all right, well, cool. Well, let's jump to questions and answers. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to pop them into the chat box below. But to get us started, I have a question for you guys. We've talked a lot about, and it's interesting hearing the similarities where you can insert like robot or cloud on how these things impact us and how they will change society and how they will change jobs and civilization. But like, how do you guys foresee AI impacting the role of cybersecurity professionals maybe in the next 5 years? So Malcolm, let's start with you on that one.
Yeah, so ignore technology for a moment, and people have heard me say this for years: a fool with a tool is still a fool. So if you actually don't know what you're doing with the technology to achieve value and hold yourself accountable to it, you're going to end up just buying shit and not doing anything that's going to add value. So that to the side. Now let's make sure that we're getting value out of it from a cybersecurity perspective. For me, it's all around efficiency and effectiveness. How do I make my existing bodies of security and compliance folks more efficient so they can cover more ground, right? We've got a labor shortage. How can I hold my labor flat and do more things? Then there's the effectiveness. How can I take, and again, I'll use a silence example, but it applied towards anything else. Traditional AV, which was at best 30 to 50% effective, and then get something that's 99% effective. How do I have that control efficacy be high? My bodies and people I'm throwing at it be flat to down, and then how do I use AI to not jack up the user experience? How do I reduce the friction on computing and friction on a business process because of the security controls? If you can lower the risk, lower the cost, and lower the friction on a user in the business, those are the three value knobs that I've always, going back 23 years ago, when Andy Grove was still running Intel, I started running security. Those were the three value knobs. How do I manage risk? How do I manage total cost? How do I manage the friction that a control creates on the business? And AI can, in essence, shrink all of those things if defined appropriately, implemented appropriately, and operated appropriately by a security organization.
Simon, so to you, by the way, it's nice to, I think that's the vision and the idea, right? Being able to, how do we enrich our teams to be, our existing teams to be more efficient and effective? I come back to this, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, but Simon, like, do you see like understanding AI and securing AI almost like its own profession? Like you have red teamers and blue teamers and people that are specifically good on certain things. Do you see AI almost becoming its own profession?
I think it will be a specialist, a specialization in the short term, like cloud is. Like we've gone from cloud being somebody else's computer to cloud being somebody else's application. If you think about cloud now, we don't use it just for the iron. We use it because of all the richness of the stuff it does for us. It's an application, but there are cloud security professionals, which really are, application security professionals focused on AWS or Azure, etc. AI is going to be the same. It's going to be a speciality, but it's just another application. In the same way SAP is, or Excel, etc. So over, the long term, it's just going to be application security, but it will start with a specialization because it's so new and weird. And the questions we need to ask ourselves about how to use it properly and effectively and safely and with low risk are different to other applications right now. Yeah,
So
we share a whole bunch of stuff with AI that, we need to be asking the question, like, is it appropriate? Is it sufficiently contained?
Yeah, I think that leads to a great question, which is with AI becoming so integral to cybersecurity, maybe for everyone that's attending today, how can organizations ensure that these systems remain transparent and auditable to maintain accountability? So what are some, 2 or 3 things and then Malcolm will come to you, just closing us out. What are 2 to 3 things that organizations can do to help ensure that these systems are transparent and auditable to maintain the accountability? So Simon, we'll go to you first, and then Malcolm will jump to you.
There is an emerging class of vendor who provide services and technology that does this, like firewalls for AI, not to stop you using AI, but to do tokenization and PII detection, etc. So there's, if you're an aggressive busy user, there's that domain. I think at the moment it really starts with having a robust understanding on how it's being used, not from a point of saying no, but from a point of understanding where the risk is and where the AI data is making its way into the business. And remember, there's traditional AI, which is very incumbent and everybody knows it's happening, and then Gen AI, which is coming, which is like the shadow AI that we're dealing with right now because it's so accessible to people. So start with embracing it, saying, let's be transparent about it. Let's understand how we're using it, where we're using it. Bring the CISO in the equation to get risk. And if it is a business enabler for you, if it's becoming really good for your business, investigate some of this vendor community that provides some monitoring, auditability, PII protection, etc.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Malcolm, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's funny. We just had this dialogue in the Security for AI Council that I led at Black Hat, and we had, I don't know, 12, 13 folks there. And the third-party risk of AI embedded in solutions came up. And, kind of adding to what Simon said, though, in a part of the dialogue, these CISOs that were there, we talked about it, and they said, by and large, they're very disappointed with the vendor community's ability to actually tell them if they're using AI, tell them how they're using AI, and tell them how they're securing it. And then I asked them all the question, I said, well, what about the security vendors? And they're like, they're slightly better than the other vendors. So there, as a vendor community, the vendors are doing a poor job of communicating their use of AI and how they're managing their risk. Now, for me, what I would do is start asking some basic questions. Are you using AI in the product or service you're delivering? And this goes beyond just tech vendors. You should be asking your law firms, your accountants, anybody, if they're using AI in the services or solutions they're providing to you. Number two, you should say, did you create the model yourself? Or is it a foundation model from a public repository so that you can understand the origins of it? Again, it's like a software bill of materials. We've talked about SBOM, AI bomb, a data bomb. Where did the data come from that was used in that stuff? You start asking the questions around the risks that the AI could present. Are they logging and monitoring interactions around those models? Are they able to provide runtime protection to see if attacks are occurring against the models? And again, one of the frameworks that I'd point people to start looking at these things and asking questions, we're all, I think, familiar with the MITRE ATT&CK framework. Everybody's been using it for years. MITRE released a couple of years ago the MITRE Atlas framework. It's an attack framework specific to AI. Go read that, go look at that, and then go start asking your questions of your vendors around how they're managing and mitigating those attack vectors against AI. And again, from my short sample survey of over a dozen CISOs and companies and organizations you'd all know, but I can't mention, they all basically said they were getting poor responses from their vendors. But it's up to us as the managers of risk to go apply pressure around the vendors to manage and identify and be transparent on what they're doing around the risks of AI and the risks that would present to me as a customer.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think it's almost like self-regulated industry, right? The people that are overseeing this, you guys can say, hey, you're not going to do business with me unless you have X, Y, and Z, just like SOC 2, Type 2, like all these different compliance vectors that are out there.
One large bank said they were already putting in all of their supplier contracts that their vendors are contractually obligated to notify them before AI is embedded in a solution or in use that could affect them, so that way they can start understanding the risk dynamics for that financial institution.
It's great to hear.
Financial is very keen on understanding the training data, like to understand the potential for bias there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, big time. I bet I just deposited a mobile check from one of my accounts to another account. I got an email from the bank that was depositing it that was like, in the account that I transferred from is fairly new. I got an email that said, hey, based upon some confidential data and some AI, we were able to decide this is a new account. So we're going to hold your deposit for 3 days. Like, even they're using it, so they understand the power of it. Well, look, gentlemen, 2 o'clock is the top of the hour. I really appreciate you guys joining. Thanks for everybody for spending an hour with us. In summary, really what we want to do is learn how to use AI to make tools and teams more faster and more accurate. Understand the regulation between balanced and optimized. And we should be embracing AI, but bring in stakeholders to stay abreast of the new tools to help to protect your organization. Thank you, Malcolm, for the MITRE Atlas framework. That's a great thing to point to. And finally, ask questions of all your vendors, legal, finance, AR, all of them, to understand how they're using AI and to help stay protected. So with that, I want to thank you guys all for being here today. I really appreciate the discussion. Special thanks to our hosts, Simon and Malcolm, for being with us this afternoon. And we look forward to seeing you again on one of our webinars. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thanks.